Good morning, friends. I'm loud and clear. So, today's talk, service-oriented applications, the Dublin way. How many of you build service-oriented applications? Big hands. Okay, how many of you use WCF and WF for that? Show of hands. How many of you have heard about something called Dublin or AppFabric? Cool, fantastic. So most of you are in the right room. How many of you have never heard of workflows? And don't be shy about this question if you have not. The reason I am asking is there is another talk that I am doing that is a little bit more elementary than this talk, which introduces the workflow concept. So if you are new to workflows, if you don't know about workflows, if you're new to workflows, if you don't know about workflows, that's the talk I would recommend that you attend. This talk primarily I will be talking about the new management utilities called the AppFabric on Windows Server 2008 and Windows 7 also. So let's get going. Before we get into the talk, let's set some perspective to the discussion. What is a workflow? This diagram, does it remind you of something? A typical workflow-oriented system, right, where something flows, some action happens on that particular object. It could be an external system, it could be a human being, it could be a third-party system that's doing some action on that particular task or something, and then finally some sort of a result is intimated back to the originator of the whole discussion or the originator of the whole process. So when we are thinking of these kind of systems, what are the things as a developer that we have to do? Can you name a few? Like, what are the things that you would do when you have to build such a system? You'll first sort of write a workflow-based system, right? As a developer, you'll build that system. But that's not the whole thing. The real problem begins after you have developed the system. And people who are working on service-oriented applications or using WCF or WF today, can one of you just tell me a few of your pain points? What are the things that you really, really worry about once the system is ready? Sorry? Security. What else? Security comes even later once your system is deployed, ready, and Sorry? After the development process and before it goes into production. There are a few steps that happen in this stage. Hosting and binding. And what else? Testing, managing, right? So when you're looking at a holistic system, a workflow-based or a service-oriented system, after you have built the system, the couple of things that are more important or very important are, how do you host the system? How do you make sure that you can manage the system, monitor the system, right? Because if something goes wrong in the system, how will you make sure, or how will you find out what are the faulty parts in the system? Now, what do you do today? As of now, today, what are the options that are available to you? What do you do when you have a workflow-based system that, let's say, you have deployed? Where do you deploy a workflow-based system on Windows? What is the hosting environment that you typically use? IaaS? Now, once you've deployed it, what are the things that you have to take care of? Or how do you do them? Logging, right? What else? So what do you use for logging? Either Windows log or probably write some sort of a custom logging mechanism, right? What else? IS server logs, right? What else? Okay, apart from logging, what are the other things? Authentication. What do you do for authentication today? Sorry? IS level authentication. Okay. Let me give you an example. Let's say in the previous diagram, if there is a dependency on an external system and that external system for some reason or the other is not working or doesn't function properly, okay, what happens to your workflow? So just to give a perspective again, let's go back to this diagram. So let's say the arrow number 2 that stops working for some reason or the other. Okay? And that's not your system. Okay, that's a third-party system that you're interacting with. Now what happens to your workflow? It'll get stopped, right? And when it stops, what happens? What do you do? Sorry? Recovery. How do you recover from an external failure? You'll choose some other path. Let's say your workflow is something that cannot choose another path, is dependent upon that system. If that system doesn't work, it has to somehow wait for that system to come up or recover somehow from there. What do you do today? Sorry? SLA, okay. Anybody heard of persistence? Can you make use of persistence in such a scenario? What do you do with persistence in that case? You save your workflow, you persist your workflow, and wait for the other workflow or the other service to be available, and then you recover from there. Okay? So you somehow make use of persistence to recover from an external failure. Okay? Dublin refers to the management part of things. How do you manage your workflows? How do you manage your work services? And how do you maintain logging or persistence or things like that? Okay? Whereas velocity refers to the caching mechanism that's available in the AppFabric services. Again, this talk is only about Dublin. We will talk only about the management part of things, not the caching part of things. If you are interested in caching, we can probably have an offline discussion. Windows Azure AppFabric primarily consists of two things, the access control and the service bus. So, okay, just to give some perspective if people confuse, because a lot of times when you go and start searching on the net and you put in the terms AppFabric, you'll get both of these. So don't confuse. If you are building workflow services or services on Windows platform, you will have to look at the Windows Server AppFabric and not the Azure AppFabric, unless you are going to build composite applications for the cloud and the Windows platform both, in which case you should also look at Azure AppFabric. Now the first thing to do to get the AppFabric is go and install it. So it's not a part of the Windows platform by default. You have to download it and install it. Just search for Windows Server AppFabric. I've put in the screenshot here. Right now it's in the beta 2 version, so that's what you'll get when you download it. Once you've installed the AppFabric, there are a couple of things that change on your system. The first thing that happens is you get something called a AppFabric Configuration Manager. So that's a separate wizard-based UI that allows you to configure your AppFabric. Then there are a couple of services, new services that are installed on your system. The three services that get installed are the AppFabric caching service, the event collection service, and the workflow management service. So now refer back to what we discussed earlier. Three services: caching, event, and workflow management service. Can you tell me what was the code name of the caching service? Velocity. What is the code name of the management service? Dublin. Okay, so these are the two services that we are referring to. And in this particular talk, we'll only talk about workflow management services. And finally, inside your IaaS management console, you get some new buttons or new features, which is, if you look at this part here, the AppFabric dashboard, the endpoints, and the services. So you get this new section in your IaaS manager. How many of you use the IaaS manager? How many of you don't know what is an IaaS manager? IaaS manager is basically a console that allows you to manage your IaaS worker processes. Okay, so if you have 5 or 10 web applications running on your system, you will use the IaaS manager to configure and manage them. Okay, so because all of your services or workflow services are hosted on IaaS, you will need IaaS manager or IaaS management console to manage your installations. So these are the three new things, or the AppFabric section, that you will get once you install the AppFabric Configuration Manager. Now, once you've done this, what is it that you can do with these things? And that is the primary topic of today's discussion. First of all, primary objective of AppFabric is to allow you to build web services or workflow-based services which can be easily speeded up, scaled, and managed using these inbuilt utilities. So up till now, if you had to do persistence, what would you do? Sorry? You'd use SQL or you'd use probably XML-based some sort of a store, but you'd have to write a lot of code for that, right? You'd have to write persistence-based services for that. Secondly, if you had to recover from a disaster, say for example the third-party service not working, then what would you do in that case? You would again have to write code to recover. Okay, you would persist it, then you would recover it and continue working on it. Okay, workflows make it easy to do that, but still you would have to do some part of those things manually. Now with AppFabric being available, these things can become much more easier by automatically using the things that we just installed. And I'll come to that in a while. My slides are very basic just because I wanted to keep all the information in one place, but most of it would be on the demo. One very important thing to remember is AppFabric features can be maximum used for ASP.NET, WCF, and WF based applications. Okay? So AppFabric really has a value when you are building a ASP.NET based application or a WCF based application or a workflow based application. It is available for .NET 4.0 or .NET 4 along with Windows Server 2008 or Windows 7 for the Beta 2. I already mentioned the IIS manager, that's what we'll use to monitor the things, and you can also do a lot of things with Windows PowerShell. So if you want to write automated scripts for managing your web services or managing your workflow services, you can do that using the PowerShell. Finally, I'm not going to talk about the last point, but just to recap, the caching part of AppFabric allows you to create distributed in-memory caches for your web applications or web services. For web applications, scaling, high speed access, and management, these are the primary things. And for composite applications, again, using AppFabric, it becomes much more easier to build and manage services. So primary objective of AppFabric, is that clear? Yes? Yes? Okay, that's it. I don't have any more slides. Let's go back to Visual Studio. Okay, I have a sample application here that I'll be using. I'll give a small brief about that application and explain how all of that works. So, how many of you have never built a workflow-based application? Okay, so let me just, actually all of those who have not built a workflow-based application, I would suggest that you attend the other talk that I'm giving today. I think it's just after lunch, which is the declarative way to programming. So it will actually, in that I'll actually show you from scratch how can you build service-based, workflow-based systems. So I'll just show a brief about. So in case of a workflow-based system, typically how I build a system is by dragging and dropping certain activities that are available to me by default or custom activities that I create. So in this particular case, I have certain custom activities which I've created for a workflow-based system. So the workflow-based system is something like an applicant is sending an application for some job or for some interview or for some admission in an institute. The system takes this application, reviews it, sees, okay, the basic criteria is fine, then asks for a manual or a human-based verification. When everything is fine, it sends back a notification that, okay, you are hired or you're not hired, you're admitted, you're not admitted. In the meantime, once the applicant has submitted his application, he gets a notification that, okay, his application has been accepted and he will get an intimation in the near future. So I have some activities which have been predefined for my purpose. And then what I do is I create a workflow using these activities. Again, this talk is not about creating workflows, so I won't go into the depth of those things. But essentially, if you look at it, if you look at this diagram, you will get a very clear view of what it could mean or what it could be. Is it clear? Should I increase the font a little bit? So if you look at it, what does this look like? What am I doing here? How many of you have drawn flowcharts in college? All of us, right? Is this intuitive? Is this intuitive? So when you look at it, can you quickly understand what this might be? Or what am I trying to do in that? Don't be shy, come on, just say. So I have some sort of a service which is taking an application, right? Doing something on that application, which is submit job application, save the job application, and then sending a response back to the person who has submitted. And after that, the screening process begins, where I screen the application. And once the screening is done, I notify the applicant of what happened. Understandable, right? Not rocket science here. So this is a sort of a workflow-based system that I have built. Let me go back to my solution and just explain what are the things here. So this is the workflow part, the HR application services, that's where you see the workflow part. The activities project contains all of these custom activities that I've created. The contracts define the web interface for this particular web service or the workflow. The data defines the data layer or the data access layer. Again, don't go into the depths, just want to give you a brief architecture of this whole service-oriented application. And finally, I have a client application that does nothing but submits an application back to my workflow. Okay? Now, we have created this. Let's go ahead and do a simple test. So I'll open this in a browser. And let me just close this instance which has been running. So currently it just creates a development server, and well, if everything works fine, fantastic. So this is my service, okay, and it has some methods which allow me to initialize the service and instantiate the process. Okay, fine. Now since this is working fine, I know that my service is good enough. What I'll do now is I will launch my client application. And this client application is a simple WinForms application which sends or submits some sort of an application. So I've just chosen some predefined values here. It could be okay, and I'll go ahead and submit this. So now the application, this WinForms application has connected to the service which is running in the background, okay, and submitting the application. Now the application gets submitted, there is some sort of an ID that is generated and returned back to the person. What is the difference between a conventional application and a workflow-based application? Why did I choose to use a workflow-based application in this case, rather than just having an application submitted, processing it, and sending the result right there and there? That's very important. That's very important. Why do we choose a workflow-based system? Control over the process. Sorry? Multi-party interactions. What else? Scalability. Yeah. Every step what is happening. Something else. There's a very important reason, very simple but very important. Sorry? Set of predefined actions. That's a workflow, but why do we choose a workflow? Okay, let me divulge the mystery. Have you ever heard of the term called long-running processes? Okay, what is a long-running process? Now this application, when it is submitted, and a person has to review this application, somebody may do it in 5 seconds, okay? But sometimes when, okay, how many of you take part in taking interviews in your companies? So when you take an interview, sometimes it takes, even after you have taken an interview, it takes you a couple of days to decide whether or not to approve that candidate or not, right? It's not dependent on anything, but you cannot do it, right? So it is an independent process which may happen at some time or which may not happen at some time. In such scenarios, it is very difficult to keep a system which will keep running, and if this application would have taken 3 days to get registered or whatever it is, and in the meantime the person had to wait, then it wouldn't make sense, right? So you have to tell the person that, okay, I've got your application, it is being processed, this is your application ID, and in the background you continue all the remaining processes, okay, and the applicant doesn't have to wait for it. So that's a very typical scenario where you would choose a workflow based system. Now this is, okay, let's see, this is done. And this was a test. So I'm a developer. My manager told me that you have to build an application processing system based on workflows. I developed it, fine. Now this has to go to the customer. What are the steps that begin now? Hosting, right? So how will I do the hosting? I'll use IaaS. How will I put it in IaaS? Sorry? Virtual directory, and then you will some IP or something, but how will you put the files there? How will you deploy? Publish. What will you do with publishing? Okay, and how many of you have used this process for a workflow based system or a workflow service? So you couldn't do that actually, because it wasn't available up till now. Now with Visual Studio 2010 and AppFabric, what we have is the ability to publish, package, deploy a workflow based service directly into IaaS without having to do all of those things manually. And let's see how we do that. So this is the same application. It's just a different instance, and I'll tell you why I chose a different instance, because there is a small error in this instance which I want to specifically show. So what I have to do here is, now I have created this service application. In VS 2010, let's first go to the properties. On right clicking, going to properties, I'll close this. It's not really needed right now. Actually, the screen resolution really makes it weird to demonstrate. So here you see this package publish web thing, right, option, and here I choose, okay, I need only files that are required, include the database configurations, create a deployment package as a zip file, and I have entered the name of the service, how it should look like when it is finally deployed, and this is the location where the zip file will be created. So let me go ahead and say, here there should be some option saying build deployment package. So when I go and do this, a deployment package is created for me. Let's go and open this folder inside the obj, and I chose the release build. There is a folder called package, and you see this HR application services.zip file that is created for me. Now this zip file typically contains all the things that I need to host my service. And what is this service? This is a workflow based service. Okay. So now what I do is, I've already installed AppFabric on my machine, so I'm good to go. I should have certain features. I had this application here. I'll go ahead and remove this for now and redeploy it. Okay. If you don't understand anything, just raise your hand, ask me again, I'll demonstrate, because there are a couple of steps that we'll be doing here. So the first thing that I have to do is, what? We have a zip file, right, which contains the application that we need to host. So I'll go ahead and say import application. Now these are the new features that you get with AppFabric. Okay. Until now, if you had to do these things, you would typically create a virtual directory, you would copy the files from there, put it up here, and then go ahead and define all these things. Now, because we have something called AppFabric, all of these things become much more easier for us. And I'll just go ahead and make sure that I'm copying it from the right location. So I'll copy this from here. Let's go back to IIS. I'll paste this here. Object file, release, package, and the zip folder, zip file. And I click next. It picks up all the folders and whatever is required for this particular package to get hosted on IIS. I click next, define the name, picks up the metadata, connection strings, whatever it is. Click on next again. It says, do you want to use .NET 4 application pool for this application? Yes, we will have to use .NET 4 because the features that I'm talking about come with .NET 4. Okay. So I had this application there, so I'll just delete all the files that were earlier present there and redeploy this. Okay, the package gets installed. I get this log, tells me that okay, everything is fine mostly, and we are done. So now what we have is the application is hosted on IIS. So with AppFabric, what have we taken care of right now? What is the thing that was painful and the AppFabric has simplified? Development was fine, right? We would have deployment, right? Deployment and publishing the web service. Now that becomes automatic. You don't have to copy all those files. Trust me, if you try to do this thing manually without this, just editing the web config file and putting the contracts and the bindings takes decent amount of work. Okay. Now in this particular case, I've packaged it and just put it back into IIS. Let's go ahead and make sure that everything that we did is actually running fine, because earlier we tested the application in the browser, right, using the deployment server. It was running fine. Now what I'll do is I'll just open this file, that submit application form, from the IIS installation or the IIS instance, and it's not working fine actually. Requested by login. Okay, let me do one thing. Probably I know what could be the issue. I'll just delete this. From here, I'll go here, make sure that we have this rebuild solution. I might not have built it. Okay, and I'll say build deployment package. Publish succeeded, so let's go ahead and open that folder. Object release. I'll just import it once again. Okay. It's deployed properly, so okay, right, I know what's the problem. I had to do a couple of things here. Now let's go, after we have deployed, there are a couple of configurations that we need to do. So the first thing that I do is I open the WCF Configuration Manager, and inside this I choose workflow persistence, and here I have to choose the default SQL persistence store. So the error that I was getting was because I hadn't configured the persistence store. Manually, when you do it, you have to create a store in, or you have to create a database in SQL and then configure your application to use that data store. Now with AppFabric, I get this default SQL persistence store by default. I choose that, apply, okay. One more thing that I have to do here is I have to edit the bindings just to make sure that the Netpipe is available. This is one binding that is essential for this particular port because the WCF configurations or the WCF service communicates using this protocol. Once I've done this, let me see if there is anything else I missed. Okay, fairly good enough. Or actually one more thing. Right, and I have to enable that Netpipe protocol here. Okay, now I think it should. Let's go ahead and open this in the browser now. Hurrah. So now I didn't have to create the persistence store. I just configured it inside the AppFabric and deployed certain and configured certain protocols and the bindings, and my web service is now available for use. Let's go and do one thing. I'll minimize this. We will go to the dashboard again and open the dashboard for this particular application. So if you take a look at it here, there are a couple of sections in this dashboard. The first thing is the persisted WF instance, active or idle instances, call history, and finally completed calls. So what is it that the dashboard gives me? If you take a look at this and look at the information which is being shown here, what are the things that you feel you can do with it? What is this information? Okay, let's say we didn't have AppFabric, we deployed the service, and you want to find out how many times your service was called. Okay, what would you do? Sorry? Try the log file, or you would typically look at the Windows event log. Okay, what else? Okay, let's suppose, now since you've brought that point of bottleneck, let's suppose your service failed. Okay, what would you do? You would again go to the log and see why that failed. Now finding out reasons of failure or finding out precise information about your web service from the event log, is it easy? How many of you have tried to do that? Is it easy, painful? It's a cumbersome process, right? It's actually, to be very honest, it requires one separate person to sit and do that all the time. But if you have a major service that gets called 1,000 times in a day, is that feasible? Not really, right? So this is where now, if you take a look at it, if you open the AppFabric dashboard, whatever is the state of a particular service at that particular instance, okay, you can log it or monitor it from here. So managing your service and monitoring it from the dashboard becomes very easy. One of the reasons I wanted to show this to you earlier is because I have been working on this service, so I've run a couple of instances, and some numbers are already there. So just pay attention to this. WCF call history, 7 calls have been completed here. Okay, activations 4, 2 failures, 2 completions, some arbitrary numbers here. Let's go ahead and now call an instance of the client. So I'll launch the client here. I don't know why that happened. It shouldn't have happened, but I guess that's not important right now for me. So what I'll do is now I'll submit the application. It's being submitted somewhere. Let's go back to the ID has changed, so this is a new application that has been submitted. Let's go back to the IIS manager and let me just refresh this. So do you see some changes here? What happened? The call went to the WCF service, it got completed, there are no new errors, nothing more is suspended, there was no error in this particular installation. Okay. Now, this is not all. The AppFabric dashboard actually gives you the ability to go much more deeper into your application and start finding out things that otherwise would have been quite difficult to manage or find. So let's go and see, there were some errors that I had earlier. So let me just go and find, I'll click on that error which happened earlier, and I'll try and find out what is this error that happened in one of my services. Okay. So firstly, right here I get that it is an exception that has been raised by the service. This is the time when that exception occurred. Let's go and see what is that exception. Okay, so it is actually, and so this is the exception that happened because of the previous error, and the service actually didn't even get launched. Let's go back and find out some other exceptions. Probably we'll get more information about that exception here. Okay, let's look at these suspended instances. So there were two instances of this service that were suspended at some point in time. Let's try and find out why these instances got suspended. So if you look at this, the submit application, let's say view tracked WF instance, view tracked events. So, okay, here you go. So if you look at this particular thing, the monitoring services of AppFabric had in the background monitored all the events that were generated by this particular workflow. So let's look at, this is the error which happened, but that's not what we'll look at right now. We'll first take a look at how we find out what is our service doing. So if you look at this, does this remind you of something, the screen applicant thing? What is this? Did we see that somewhere earlier? Should we go back to our service? What was that? Does it remind you of something? No? Yes or no? What is that? That's an activity in your workflow. Screen applicant was an activity that you defined in your workflow, and the AppFabric is monitoring what each of these activities is doing. So in this particular case, screen applicant did something, and let's look at what is the information we have there. Okay, so you get all of these, at what instance this particular workflow or the activity was created. What is the state? Closed, so it was fine, nothing disastrous here or nothing problematic here. Now let's look at the error. So when you look at the error and you try and see, now tell me, where do you think this error happened? So we have hosted our workflow in the background. Somebody submitted an application, okay? The applicant got an ID saying that, okay, your application is submitted, but in the background some error happened because of which his application was not processed or not completed. And when you went into the AppFabric dashboard, you saw that there is an error which happened in the workflow instance unhandled exception or something like that. You click on it. Now, can you tell me from this information, where did this error happen? Notify applicant. Where do you see this? source name. So now you get the information that notify applicant, what is it? An activity, okay, in your workflow. So let's go back and see what is it. Do we have that kind of a thing here? And you have this method here, right? So this method particularly is doing something which is causing this problem. Now I'll give you a hint as to why this problem is happening, because notify applicant sends an email to the applicant, and because I've not configured the email server on this particular machine, so the email doesn't get sent, and therefore the workflow is not completed, and hence there is some problem in this. But had you, let's suppose you didn't have the AppFabric, then how would you have tracked this down? Debug would have been very, very cumbersome because it's a long running process. You never really know when is it going to happen. Event logs. Typically what you would have done is, first of all, finding out that an error happened would have taken a substantial amount of time. Secondly, once you found out that some error happened, you would have typically looked at the event log, found out where the error is, and then started debugging, okay, because now you figured out that there is an error that is happening in this particular service. It wouldn't have given you the exact activity that was generating that particular error. It would have given you the process ID which was throwing this error. So you would have then started debugging, looking at, okay, at 11:40 this error happened. But now with the AppFabric, you can actually see exactly where the error is coming from, go back and rectify it. Okay, so this is about the AppFabric dashboard. There are a couple of other things also that you would or may be interested in, which is somebody mentioned aspects about security and all those things. So I'll just quickly give you an idea that you can actually use all of those, configure your service or your workflow services using the configuration in AppFabric to say use certificates or use SQL authentication or use standard Windows authentication and all those things. You can manage the instances or persist when idle. So one of the things about workflows, because they are long running, let's suppose there is an activity that just keeps on running, okay, but nothing is happening. What is the disadvantage of that kind of a pattern or that kind of a scenario? It's using resources, right? What can you do in that scenario? You can just persist the entire workflow and then resume whenever the time or whenever the action or the event happens. So doing that is as simple as, configuring it inside the AppFabric. What are the other things that probably you may be interested in? Endpoint configuration I already mentioned, it supports all the WCF endpoints. In this particular case, we are just using basic HTTP and named pipe binding, so that's what is configured here. You could possibly go and look at more information. Okay, it says you can do it only inside the config file. Okay, let's go back to the PPT. So, do you think this feature, the AppFabric thing, will be useful for people who are building service-oriented applications and spend a lot of time managing and maintaining them? What is the biggest advantage of AppFabric? Tuning. What else? Management and maintenance of your service-oriented applications. That's primarily the biggest advantage. Let's go back to the PPT. Couple of reference points that I would mention. Specifically, the two white papers. These are sort of complete introductions to Dublin and Velocity. I haven't covered Velocity at all, so if you are interested in knowing what are the caching features of AppFabric, we'll strongly recommend looking at that. All of these things are available on MSDN, so just search for them. You will get the PPTs, so the links are right there. You can probably get the links from there itself. That's about it. Thank you. So any questions, I'm open to them now. Yes, please. No, so it is supposed to support only Windows Server 2008 and above. Windows 7 for the development environment, yes, it supports.
Okay, and how about like say the existing, because we have existing services on Windows Server 2003, hosted on 2003.
Right.
For that, does he have to use that?
Yeah, so if you have services hosted on 2003, you will not be able to make use of AppFabric for management and maintenance. If you have to make use of these features, yes, that is the only way right now that is recommended. Yes, please.
Does it support all workflow standard patterns, design patterns?
Sorry?
This Windows AppFabric, will it support all kind of workflow design patterns?
All kind of patterns?
Yeah.
Workflow patterns?
Yeah.
So, AppFabric has nothing to do with patterns. Okay, it depends upon your web service or your workflow service. What are the kind of patterns that you're implementing in them? So, the services that I've talked about are WCF services. So, WCF services are pretty much interoperable services and supports all open and standard protocols for communication and things like that. So, you can implement any pattern inside your web service as long as you want to. Okay.
Hello, I have a question. Like the velocity is the caching, right?
Sorry,
the caching part.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So velocity you use for in-memory caching.
Right. Distributed in-memory caches.
Okay. So could you just elaborate on how it has been distributed, and if I want to configure it in a high availability mode, like
right.
if one server crashes, I want to recover the cached information from another server.
Right.
Something like what memcache and memcached do.
Right.
So I just want to know how it is being done using velocity.
So with velocity, you can designate different servers or set of servers or one single server as your cache. You can maintain your cache or persist your cache on that. Secondly, whenever your application is being accessed from this particular, from your web server, the cache is actually created at this layer. So it could be on a distributed environment in case of multiple servers, or it could be on that same in-memory cache. Now let's take an example of a failure. One of the servers fails down. There are APIs available in Velocity that allow you to configure or reroute your queries to a different server. So if you are writing your application and accessing Velocity APIs, they will automatically make sure that if one of the server falls down or fails, it will be redirected to a different server on the caching layer. Essentially, the key part is you create a caching layer for Velocity, and all your caches are maintained at that particular layer. When your application works, it works with the caching layer directly. It doesn't have to make calls to the database directly. In case if one of the cache fails, let's assume, okay, if it is a distributed environment, one of the cache fails, and that particular information is not available on any of the other caching servers. In that case, the query is then further sent to the data layer or the database, and the cache is regenerated.
Yeah, there exactly my point lies. Whether the cache is replicated in real time, I mean in Velocity, if it is in a distributed mode,
yes.
Whether the cache is distributed in real time.
Cache is distributed. Reconstruction of the cache?
No, I'm just asking whether it is replicated in real time.
You mean if
say
the caching
for example,
fails?
I have, say for example, another open source alternative is memcached.
Right.
So in memcached, you can have n servers, and you can distribute and replicate the data whatever way you want.
Right.
So even if one cache goes down or one server goes down, the another daemon can pick up and the query can be redirected.
Right.
That any mechanism we can use, either we can go for the other, third-party software, or we can from ourselves on from the application point of view, we can do that.
Right. In case of Velocity, it will automatically redirect it, so you don't even have to use a third-party.
It will be replicated in real time.
Right. It is replicated at the caching layer. Okay. Now, there is, cache is ultimately a cache. It does not have your entire data.
That I
copy.
can understand.
Right. So if the data that you're trying to access is not available in the cache, in that case, when the cache has to be regenerated or let's say replenished, it will need to do a query to the database. In that case, it won't be real time.
No, that I can understand. But my question is like, what precisely I can tell you what exactly we do. We have got a real-time order management system, which we almost caches around 1 lakh records.
Okay.
So in case if one server fails,
Right.
we cannot wait for all these things to be loaded from the database to the cache.
Right.
So that in that case, if one fails, I should be able to fetch all the information that has been cached in one server, which is already failed, from the other server.
Absolutely.
So with velocity, can I achieve this?
Absolutely.
That is my
Absolutely. That's the whole point of having a distributed caching environment.
Okay.
Yes.
So I would like to get more information on these things.
So one of the things is, I would suggest if you can just get that white paper, or probably we can talk offline and I can give you more pointers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Can I ask one more thing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, this Netpipe is pre-configured with this AppFabric?
Yes.
Or we have to use Netpipe?
No, so Netpipe is basically used by AppFabric to communicate with the service. So you will. So
that is the same named pipe that we have been using in earlier systems?
Yeah, it is a named pipe. The only thing is it is a Netpipe in this particular case.
Okay, in this case, if it is a Netpipe, that is a TCP implementation of named pipe?
Yes.
Internally?
Yes, yes. It is a TCP.
So we must use Netpipe. Is it compulsory?
Yes. For letting this, you don't have to use it in your service. Your service can be TCP IP, basic HTTP, whatever it is. Netpipe is only used by the AppFabric to communicate with your web service to collect the events.
Okay, that's right. Okay. Another thing is that in case we are deploying two services in the same server, and I'm communicating using the Netpipe.
Right.
So will it be TCP based or will it be using the named pipe?
So it will be a named pipe implemented over TCP.
Oh, so in that case also I'll have to, even if it is in the same machine, I'll have to go enter through the TCP stack.
So it will implement filtering.
Because the only advantage of named pipe is that it can be like, it is like shared memory.
Right. See, what I showed you is on a single machine. Okay. But typically that's not how your real world environments would be. Because you would be monitoring from a different server, whereas your applications would be set up on a different server.
Yeah, that's perfect. But if say for example I have got I can scale up the system like anything. Like for example, a small implementation, even I can host all services on the same machine.
Right.
So if I can exploit the speed of named pipes or the performance of named pipes, that would be better.
Oh, absolutely. So you can actually configure AppFabric to use a different protocol.
But I do not want to go for the TCP stack.
Absolutely. You can create a named pipe. You can create a socket-based communication. So you can implement your own channel for that matter.
Okay.
Okay. By default, it is configured for Netpipes. Okay, friends.